YouTube. Wait,
So hello everybody. I guess we're live on this thing. I'm Kyle Cordes again from Oasis Digital. Who wants to go around and introduce themselves?
I can go.
Go ahead.
I'm David Moore. I haven't been here before, so I don't know how the whole introduction order goes. So yeah, I've been a developer for quite some time, and to deal with they brought me on board because I've dealt a lot with AngularJS and porting some large AngularJS project over to Angular.
And we like them.
Some days.
That's
and it's got that really cool like podcaster grade microphone going. So there's that.
Well, I am a podcaster, so.
Lance, Paul.
I'm Paul Spears, architect here at Oasis. Spend a lot of my time with the consulting and the training and the leading of other team members.
Lance?
And I'm Lance Finney, also a developer and instructor with Oasis and Angular Bootcamp. I've been working on a project as a lead for about a year now. Been on a bunch of other projects over the years.
Very cool. So what's going on this week, everybody?
I have something tangentially related to everything that we normally do with coding. Google suspended the developer of Terraria's account.
I saw that.
15 years worth of email, thousands of dollars worth of purchases. Not able to get his account back, and has since canceled the Stadia release of Terraria because of the still doesn't have his account back and horrible customer service.
I mean, that's like a crazy thing. As far as I can tell, like Google had if you're on a Google professional offering, disclaimer, we use one, a G Suite like this. They've renamed G Suite. There's like customer service and so on. But I've seen a bunch of stories on Twitter about how people who are only on kind of the free tier of Google services, it's like nearly impossible to like find someone to say, "Hey, you broke my thing by accident. I wasn't whatever you thought." And that's awful.
Yeah, the article I was reading on Ars Technica was saying that they wouldn't do like a call, a private resolution, and basically tried to troubleshoot. One of the people at Google was trying to troubleshoot the issue over Twitter to like have him try and reset his password, which won't work when your account is banned. And it's from everything that he recalls, because he doesn't have access to his email, that it was a terms of service issue, but he hasn't uploaded anything to the YouTube account that was supposedly violating terms of service in months. So likely a false flag of some sort.
I mean, doesn't it seem like there's just so many instances of that thing where like if you're not the one paying money, you're not the customer?
Yeah.
There's just like so many of those. But on the other hand, you can imagine like a hypothetical competitor to Gmail that costs $10 would never get within a factor of 1,000 of the user base.
Right. Yeah, I have a friend who runs his own Google-like email server, like an open source version for his own stuff because of, there's a lot of he's very privacy oriented. And so, but this is like, it makes me want to go talk to him and say, how do I get off of Google? But bringing it into the programming sphere, what would happen if you're on, what would happen if you're on Google's live, Firebase, etc., and suddenly your account got locked? Same with AWS, same with any of these places.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, I think it's important to differentiate. There's a big difference between the level of service that free gets and that like paid gets. So I think it's theoretically possible that it could happen on a paid account also. I have no idea what the numbers are behind it, but it's not quite the same thing. Definitely if I was going to deploy on whatever AWS, whatever Amazon or whatever, Google's Firebase, I would not deploy anything I cared about on a free tier, even if my usage fit on a free tier, just because
that's for demo work.
Yeah, it's the way the internet works is there's like these free tiers. I think Google ends up being kind of the poster child for it, but I think it actually applies to the other ones also, that there's just some algorithm running, and if it thinks that a free user's account is bad, it just cuts it off, and there's nobody who has budget to hire a customer service team to even take a phone call. It's just, it's brutal.
Yep. I'm gonna be interested in seeing how this all plays out, because I imagine there's some managers in the Stadia space at Google who are very upset right now that they're losing Terraria, which has been out for a long time. It's a very popular indie game, and then suddenly it's gone because someone with the YouTube algorithm couldn't fix an error.
Yeah, the weird thing is that it's not that because somebody messed up.
It's something messed up.
It's because, as I understand, there is no department and there is no person whose job would include hiring a department to provide customer service in that context. There's such a gaping hole that the organization doesn't even have a way to offer that, even if some people at the organization thought they should have customer service.
The only people that I know of who get any sort of personal customer service through YouTube are people with millions of subscribers.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
Then they get basically a concierge almost. Of,
right.
Contact.
Right. If you're popular enough that an executive at a consumer free cloud company recognizes you when you're having trouble, they call someone, and then that someone whose job is not to provide customer service goes and provides customer service. Well, that's why we tell people you should do business with small companies like Oasis Digital. Not
you get personal touch.
I mean, who answers the phone here? Do we even have a phone here?
There are phones. They are answered.
So I got something.
Yeah.
Wrapped up our first Angular for Architects class last week. This is a culmination. I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago, but it's the culmination of kind of all the consulting and the teaching that we've been doing in Angular for many years, kind of finally formally packaged in an actual class you can just go buy however many units of off the shelf.
I'll take 17 units of Architect, please.
Yep.
So if it's Angular for Architects, is it if you're already an architect, come here, or is it I'm a senior Angular developer and I wish I was an architect, I come here?
Well, I can kind of move from the theoretical to the practical now that we've had the class. In our most recent class, we had, I would say the majority were folks that were kind of reporting themselves as being architects at their company or team leads at their company. We had a number of people who were more at the product manager, product owner side of things. We had a couple of folks who were release managers for their organization, and they were all bringing kind of different concerns, different organizational kind of issues that they were hoping to get answers for to the class. But it struck right at the heart for all of them of the fact that Angular is more than just the code we write for components. It ties in many ways to develop teams, organizations, the way they deploy, how they test, how they structure, etc.
So I just realized I forgot to mention at the very beginning of this to point out to our few handfuls of live viewers, we are going to talk about AngularJS to Angular topics a little later. So hang on, we'll get there. We're just kind of catching up with some other goings on. So you said we did the first one. Does that mean we're going to do a second one?
Yeah, I believe we've already got it listed on our events page.
Nice.
Yep. So we had a lot of success with it. We're still doing another beta, still discounted event for this one. The first one, it went great. We of course we knew we would find some areas to improve, so now we're just going to refine those a bit more, and we're hopeful that this is the last beta. That after this, it'll go into full normal Angular for Architects class.
So are we team teaching this one, like we often do?
Yeah, we'll have a small number of us all kind of working together. I'll be teaching this one again. I led the last one. I'll be leading this one again, and then we'll have a number of us there helping out, contributing, telling their stories, bringing stories and anecdotes from their clients and past to kind of compare and contrast.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's one of the ththings where I work here and it's our thing. And I wish I had time to just sit and be in the thing.
Yeah.
But my job unfortunately involves less Angular architecting than it used to, so I cannot justify actually attending this thing that sounds so amazing.
Several of the developers on my team have asked if they can take time off from the project to attend it, including me, actually. So I think we're going to have a queue of our people to go through and to learn from Paul and the other people who have been developing this together, that way of thinking. And it's not that those of us who have been working with the company don't know a lot of these things, but from what I've seen of what Paul has talked about his class, it provides a holistic view that I think will really help bring things together that most of us just haven't seen.
Yeah.
Well, it's a cross sharing of our own company culture as well. It's bringing together all of the different experiences that our architects and our team leads have had over the going on a decade of Angular development and AngularJS development, and kind of
been that long, can it?
It's getting there.
Yeah.
It's not quite, but it's getting there. Of AngularJS and Angular experience, and we all encounter different problems, different domains. We've worked on so many now across so many people that when you aggregate that, it kind of brings in a whole other story to, hey, what does this Angular beast look like when you step back and look at it from all those angles?
Yeah, I was going to say, going back to Lance's point, which is going from senior developer to architect can be very iffy. I've been to several different companies and they all defined architect slightly differently. And so it's also hard to know what skills am I missing. Seeing that more holistic, rounded definitions of an Angular architect let you know, oh, okay, I've got all these skills. I know all these things, and this is how it all fits together. Oh, and I'm missing these few pieces over here, and I'm now going to learn those in this Angular for Architect course. And hopefully at that point, go from senior dev to architect or level up your architect skills because you just didn't know it before.
Yeah, because of that idea that there's different kinds of meanings for architect as you go from one organization to the other. We don't, in the class, we don't actually try to define what an architect is. Rather, we do something like, I'm going to put a line of code up on the screen and discuss how that's going to impact your time, your budget, your organization. And if you care about how a line of code affects these things, and you want to understand how that line of code affects these things, then you probably want this Angular for Architects class.
So those who have watched a previous episode here will notice we're gradually upping our game and understanding how to use our tools. Lance just successfully put a link in the chat here. So if you're following along the chat, we have found a way to enable at least us to put links in the chat to this Angular for Architects that we keep talking about. So any other pre-topics before we get into our main topics of the day?
Yeah,
I have one, but I'm
2 weeks ago, I was pasting link after link as we talked about things and not realizing that because of our settings, Kyle was the only one who was able to do it. So all of those links that I pasted were lost, but now it'll work. Now it'll work.
Like I can just click this button here, and this is the link that Lance just put up. See?
Nice.
So I guess my little pre-topic is so So not right this very minute. You have to wait like 1 or 2 more days. So if you're watching this on replay, please go ahead. So we're hiring. We're looking for more folks who are deep in the Angular weeds to come on and join us. We're kind of in growth mode here, and our team is getting busy and full, and we need more of us. So I guess follow our various social medias, and in the next few days we'll be posting links of like how to apply and so on. We do kind of use our how to apply as a test of people's ability to follow directions, in that people who try to spam us instead of applying one place, people who try to apply 10 places, we throw away. So I don't know if that's too hostile of a thing to do, but we do that. So please watch our social, hang on, and there will be a way to read the details of what we're looking for, who we're looking for, and please apply if that's you and if you feel like being part of this whole shenanigan going on. So anybody else with more pre-topics?
I have a slight segue into our main topic, which is Paul is correct. AngularJS has a copyright date starting 2010. So
wow,
at least 10 years, probably more closer to 11. And I've been in it for most of it.
So our main topic for today is help. I'm still on AngularJS. My team's still on AngularJS. We've got a bunch of AngularJS. We've got 1 or more substantial applications. We're running our operation on AngularJS. Where do we go from here? It's obviously getting to the point where companies are ready to start deciding what to do going forward. I think we kind of naively thought that when Angular 2 came out and then 2 became skip 3, became 4, became 5, that teams would be moving over quickly. But it's become obvious from many customer relationships that many large, important projects out there, running major departments at huge organizations are still on AngularJS, and pretty happily. But it's 2021 now, and many of those groups are starting to really feel the pressure. So our goal for today was to just sort of talk through what are all the different things you can do going forward. So kind of list what are all the paths you can do, and then just talk about some trade-offs, some pluses and minuses of each, and then talk about not necessarily like what's the right thing to do, but more like what are some, how do you decide? So we want to have kind of a discussion, if we can, about what can we do and how do we choose if we find ourselves in that situation. I'm going to take a couple of notes that once we have a list of paths forward, I'll be able to share as a screenshot, so we're not only spouting them out verbally, but who wants to start talking? Who wants about things you can do, paths forward?
Well, I could talk a little bit about like some of the problems that happen between AngularJS and Angular that prevents you from moving to Angular.
So I do want to let's not assume the path forward from AngularJS is always to go to Angular, right?
That is another thing. Yes, you could. One of the things, if you're going from AngularJS to Angular, or even AngularJS to React, since React is now doing TypeScript, is Angular was in JavaScript. You didn't have to write TypeScript. In the AngularJS project that I had, moving to Angular was actually easier, but still very difficult, because we had chosen a couple of years before Angular came out, let's use TypeScript to give us strong typing. And so we all knew TypeScript, all of our code was in TypeScript. And then we could slowly move things over. And really the only reason why, looks like we might have lost Kyle here. Hopefully he'll come back. But really the only reason why we were able to, at that company, start to move over is the AngularJS, we had, for our own reasons, decided not to use the AngularJS router. It might still work if you did use the AngularJS router, but it allowed us to run AngularJS and Angular on the same page, kind of in a micro front end before micro front ends were a thing sort of framework. And it allowed us to use the Angular router and this homegrown router at the same time and be able to go back and forth. So we had them both on the same page. And so all the new code was being created in Angular, and all the old code could be slowly replaced. We were also still on Flex at the time, so we had three different technologies. So
it sounds like you're talking about another path forward here, right? You're saying, so one of the paths forward is to incrementally move features.
Yes. And when Angular came out, they had two different ways to upgrade. One was the big bang, which was rewrite everything. And the other one was to do incremental upgrades by either having Angular components run inside AngularJS or Angular being a top level and then AngularJS running inside of it. We kind of did a third hand where they were running side by side, but would be able to go back and forth to those different components and pages via routing.
So
I want to go ahead.
There's another path forward.
Yeah.
Stasis.
Yeah.
If you're not actually changing your project anymore and it doesn't have any active bugs, maybe you don't need to move it on to something else. I would say that is only true if you don't need to do any additional work. If you're not running into any security issues, if you don't have any new features, that might work for you. But I would say that there are limited situations in which that is a reasonable option to look at. But there are a lot of projects out there that are pretty much done. And if that's your situation, stick with it.
So if you saw my screen I just shared briefly, I got in a plug for our friends at XLTS who are going to be offering long-term support services for Angular. Once Google stops, they're going to commit to patching any serious security bugs, to fixing anything that breaks from a major browser version, that kind of thing. So Stasis that's actually I think it's an underappreciated path. So we're up to 4. We have stay where you're at. We have just rewrite the thing in Angular. We have incrementally move features to Angular. We have move to a different framework. And I think David mentioned React. I added Svelte and Vue to the list because I think in terms of making the decision, though, kind of where you're heading is a little bit irrelevant to deciding if your answer is to step out of the Angular ecosystem into a different one. Are there any other major paths forward?
So this is kind of a half-step kind of path, and that is sit down and reevaluate what you're actually going to migrate. Before you make the decision on that path, sit down and look at your feature set. Do some analysis. Are all of your features actually going to move forward in the future? Do you have more features coming? Are you able to stop development on some features but not others? Where are you going to freeze your code at what point? All of these little factors come into helping you pick which of these paths is actually right for you.
Yeah, I think that counts as another different path forward, is simply decide not to move the whole app, but take a fresh look, which I think you're saying, and maybe you only decide to move some things and skip the rest. Yeah,
there was a client that we helped migrate where rather than kind of migrate the whole thing, we said, hey, it sounds like you're only interested in actually doing feature development on this one little subsection of the app. And we worked with them, the product owners, and came to the conclusion that, let's just rewrite this one feature in Angular and leave the rest in Stasis, like Lance described. So we were able to, not look at this problem as one big ball that we have to tackle holistically, and instead just cleverly slice off a slice of it and made it much easier.
Yeah, if you're able to do that, you have, that's a really good way to do it, because as you program, as you continue to build an application, it kind of grows organically at that point, and some of it you might just need to prune back. or that may be so niche, and you're shoehorning it into that particular app. Maybe that extra piece that you don't want to migrate, maybe it becomes its own separate app, which you could then migrate at that time as well.
And this doesn't fit exactly into our things to go forward from AngularJS, but it ties in directly to what you're saying, David. Is I've sometimes counseled people, look at your application, look at the features, especially for like internal enterprise applications. And if you want to either mentally promote yourselves 4 layers up the org, or act as though you are 4 or 5 layers up the org, look at an application that has a bunch of GUI features and find a way to reimagine that application where instead of there being this GUI, which is what Angular is used to build, and then as an organization, the organization hires and employs a team of people to operate an application. See if there's a way to rewrite the application to just do whatever job without humans operating it. So try to what if you didn't have a GUI? What if whatever the fundamental job of this application was, it did without humans clicking on it? Now that's pretty far afield from our AngularJS question, but I think it kind of fits in that thing you're discussing, David, of take a hard look about what the app should really do.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on other projects. One of the projects I'm currently on has a lot of. It has its core team, but then it has 3 or 4 different groups of people that all have sometimes conflicting business logic that needs to go into something. And, right now we're looking at actually splitting some of those pieces off and out of the application using more of a micro front end architecture, so that everything's kind of still one dashboard portal sort of thing, but so that one user could go in and access all these different pieces. But really, if you're coming in from the idea of, I don't want to name any group names, but like Group A, if they have a certain workflow and your user is coming in from that aspect, they're not going to touch any of the Group B or C portions. And so keeping those portions separate helps, taking a good look and being able to pull those out and apart would help transition you to another framework, update Angular, etc., or find out what just needs to get called. If you're still on Angular, you're probably writing code that's probably 8 years old now. There's probably code in there that can just get thrown away.
So before we go too much farther, I wanted to share this xlts URL. And this is in the chat also if somebody wants a clickable version. Oh, look, I made a typo. Okay, so it sounds like we have quite a bit then on this, cleaving it apart and migrating only what really matters, leaving behind, right? That's what you were saying. There might be whole swaths of feature that instead of for how to move this, a team might consider saying, do we really need this feature?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can actually give an opposite scenario where no, we really do have to migrate all of this. It's absolutely critical. I've heard more than one state government department now had them come up to me and say, hey, we don't have the luxury. It is literally illegal for us not to keep this stuff around.
Right.
And so they would have a sprawling website with dozens and dozens of links to different official forms and apps and features within the state government, and need to maintain all of that. And furthermore, the government isn't stopping because someone wants to do a framework upgrade, right? And so their old version of their app needs to continue to update in the face of changes in the world as they migrate to a newer platform to continue that development.
Yep.
So all these things that we've been talking about so far, they're nice to think about, nice to have, but there are still very much situations where it's just not an option.
And the thing that I find interesting is when we're talking about it, we're talking about things that might be difficult to move, but using something like a headless CMS for things like all the links and all the data that needs to be displayed, if you're not using, say, a custom workflow or something, if it's mostly an informational website, moving should not be too hard. if you have kept most of that stuff out of the UI, if you're not hard coding things in the UI and you actually pull them into the back end. So that might be a step that you want to take to simplify your front end code. In this case, AngularJS, is to pull that hard coded things out and put it into a back end so that someone could log into a CMS or write some JSON or something like that, or put it into a database that can be edited and maintained by someone else, not your site. And then it's just displayed by your site.
So I'm going to respond to that by a further rearrangement here of this document I have up for everyone to see, these notes. And that's that. So maybe you should just stay where you're at. Maybe you should slice your application apart in a way that you can just leave some features behind completely. Maybe you can meet some of the needs with off-the-shelf software instead of with a new version of your app. And I included the greatly exploding no-code market in that. And then you mentioned off-the-shelf software like a CMS. I'm going to mention that we have a sister company which helps companies get very interesting things done inside Jira, which can actually be pretty nice if well configured, even though many developers have had some frustrating Jira experiences. And so I'm kind of putting this in the order of, turn back things you could do instead of like rewriting a big body of code, right? And so now we get to like the serious choices. Well, you can either head away from Angular, or you can head into Angular. And then I started breaking down of different ways, different like subpaths. Yeah. So do we have any other things to discuss in the general fork of not rewriting or not doing an Angular-based code solution? Because at some point, I think that people watching are going to get antsy for us to hear about actually migrating your code.
Yeah, for moving to another framework, I mean, that is definitely a valid decision to make. You really want to evaluate what your project is doing before you decide to say, oh, React is huge and growing, let's move to it. That's not the right reason to move to React. The right reason to move to React is, does React do what we need to do for this project? And React is kind of you bring your own solutions to it, whereas Angular is very opinionated in how certain things are done. And so you have to decide, is Angular what you want to move to, or is it something like Svelte, React, Vue, etc.? Will that help you write better code and help you write that same code more quickly?
I just wrote that down as a topic of a future episode, David. We're definitely going to have to.
How to choose a front end framework? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to tie back into earlier when I was talking about, Angular. There's more to Angular architecture than the code. That's also true of your app deployment. Like how does the choice of AngularJS and the decision to what framework to move to, how is that going to affect your org, your teams, your deployment model, your code organization model moving forward as well? So when choosing to move forward to Angular versus another framework, don't forget to step outside of the app and look at that broader impact on your organization.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when I started AngularJS, we were using Grunt and Gulp and other stuff like that. And we basically had to cobble together our own build and deployment however we could. And when, Angular has the Angular CLI, or if you need it, Narwhal's NX, and it has a whole CLI that helps you write stuff. It spits out framework code for you that you can then, after that, start customizing into your own pieces. I'm not as familiar with what tooling comes with React, Svelte, Vue, etc., to help you as a developer get stuff out the door. And that's another area that you should definitely take a look at if you're considering moving.
I don't want to wander too far off the deep end of my NX fanboyhood, but the NX folks would probably tell you that NX is the tool you would use to do that in a React, in a set of family of React applications. But
that's probably very true. Yeah, NX is your one-stop shop, is what you're saying.
There you go. Perfect. Okay. So I think we've ran out of ways to avoid how to actually move forward. If you thought through everything we just discussed for 20 minutes, and the right thing for your app is to stay in the Angular ecosystem. Maybe let's say you're benefiting tremendously from the Angular ecosystem. The obvious path is to stay in it. You have one or more big applications in AngularJS. You've probably got a ton of dependencies between them and the third-party code. And you probably are subject to some level of having to keep the world spinning while you go, right? I mean, I would guess that, like, well, I'm trying to think. I know there are occasionally environments where it's okay to go a year between releases, that sort of thing. But I think Lance raised his hand. I think he's actually worked in one of those. But yeah. I believe most of the projects we work on for customers really can't go a year between releases. They may be able to occasionally take some months, but they mostly have to keep a cadence up. So kind of subject to kind of all that real world stuff, what are the different approaches of how to get from AngularJS to Angular? I sort of listened to some words and wrote a few notes down on these notes. What are the ways and what are the trade-offs?
Yeah, on some level, I'm not going to have a great answer to this, because the one time that I've done a large AngularJS to Angular conversion was in that exceptional case that you mentioned, because I was working for a large medical device company that had huge regulations with the federal government and all these other things. So it was a 2-year release cycle. So when we got done with one release, it was when Angular 2 was at about Alpha 24, and we started switching over, and we had 2 years before they were going to ask us to release anything again. So we had time to do a complete rewrite, and it hurt, because that was in the alpha days when there wasn't a CLI, the testing wasn't really there, and so many things were changing underneath us as we wrote code. It would hurt a lot less today because so much more is but we had the luxury of time to have that pain. Most teams don't.
So Lance, you're saying you had the long release cycle, so you were able to choose the kind of rewrite the whole thing path.
Yep.
So my question is, like, would you always recommend doing the, rewrite the whole thing at once if you have the release cycle? Or do you think you might, even given the presence of a release cycle, you might choose some other approach other than to rewrite it all in one mass?
I mean, I don't have a huge sample size to go by, but in my experience, it was really useful to convert everything from within a release cycle. And the application wasn't too big to do that in the time period we had. A lot of projects, like even 2 years might not be enough time to rewrite everything.
Yeah, I think some of the words that you had there were very, very insightful, which is if the project's not too large. Because usually if the project is large enough, you run into, going to pull something from clean code, which is the Tiger team problem, where, you have this legacy code effectively, which is what we're talking about. You want to move it over to something else, in Angular in this case, and you start a new team that starts writing that. But the first group is also still writing new features, which also then have to be run by this Tiger team. And then you have this other third team that goes, well, that second team is falling behind, and we have this new technology that we have to move to. And so you end up having like 3 sets of parallel developments going on. So, depending upon how big the project is, doing a complete greenfield rewrite may or may not be feasible. If it's small enough, it's definitely feasible. But like for the project that I have, which has 150,000 files, that's not feasible, considering they're having to do new features every 3 months or so. We would not be able to do that if we had to rewrite it all in another framework.
I'm kind of living that world right now. It's not AngularJS specific at all, but it's very easy to see how these kind of organizational problems are actually going to absolutely be relevant with AngularJS. And I've got a client where I'm kind of helping them understand and prepare themselves for a migration from Angular to Blazor. Turns out the majority of their development team are C# developers and have been forever. And so it was actually a new idea to them to move to a single page JavaScript framework, and their team is having a hard time adjusting to that world. And then Blazor arrived, and now they're like, oh, hey, I want some of that. And so they're in this world of like, they actually have a Windows desktop app that they were in progress of trying to rewrite to Angular across their suite of applications. And now they're like 3/4 of the way done with that and have started again now with Blazor. And so that is absolutely true. I've witnessed it in the wild where that long release cycle is actually now going to bite them because it allowed a window long enough where the world changed up from underneath them again.
So I keep refining the language here. I'm saying you should only consider the mass rewrite if you have a very long release cycle, where very long would mean long enough to rewrite the whole thing. And I added the word consider, Paul.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're saying that even if you have enough time, there are really nasty failure modes and problems that you can hit from trying to rewrite your whole world at once. That even if you think you have enough time to do it, it still might not be a good idea.
And I would also add into that consideration that your features are frozen at that point. You're not adding new features to the old application at the same time you have to rewrite in the new application.
Well, that is the definition of a long release cycle. If you have to keep shipping new versions frequently, you don't have a long release cycle.
Well, yeah. So like the project I'm in right now, we're doing some tech debt work, but there are other teams also working on the same project that are adding new features. So if we had to, do a rewrite, we would also have to be adding new features at the same time as the rewrite happens. And so where do you add those? Do you add those? You have to add those in both if the rewrite won't be done by the time the end of the release cycle is. And so it really will depend upon how big your project is.
I mean, I'm sure there is a team somewhere with enough maturity to pull that off, to both be working on an old version while doing a rewrite without diverging. I have never met humans able to do that work. Now, maybe I just haven't worked at the right organization, but I think that is so hard that I would not consider a complete rewrite if I also had to keep the old one changing, more than a little bit during the time.
Yeah, unless you're doing like bug fix sort of things.
Yeah, it's not like an absolute rule. It's like if the amount of change is pretty small, I'd consider it. But if the amount of change in the system is going to have to continue to be substantial, then I don't think I would even consider rewriting the whole thing from scratch and hoping that they converge on a working system. There's just so many teams, so many projects where that's led to, fiscal disaster, essentially. We spent all this money on the new one and we never got it to production. I mean, how many times have we all heard that kind of story? That's like par for the course.
Well, that's what Paul basically just described. It's like, oh, okay, now so I mean, are they gonna kill the Angular version and then just write it in Blazor, or are they gonna continue writing it in Angular and hope to complete it to sunset their desktop version and to be writing in Blazor at the same time?
So their situation is a little bit different. They don't have like one single giant large application. It is more they have a fleet of small applications, and they're going to find themselves in a spot where they're sprinkled across all different things.
So it sounds like almost a perfect, like if you have one desktop or portal-ish sort of area where all of those applications get surfaced, it sounds like a perfect example of when a micro front-end architecture would be a good thing in that particular case, since it's a lot of small independent applications.
Well, they like yes and no. Like they have no need to actually tie the independent apps together.
Oh, okay. That's even even better then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the organizationally, they have like a core technologies team that is like their view of the world is we have switched from desktop to web, Angular to, we're in the process to switching to Blazor, and now the applications that they manage are lagging behind that curve of what has switched. So they're trying to now go back and redo the ones that made it to Angular to Blazor, and then the ones that remained in desktop are going to go straight to Blazor.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a much better way to a much better setup right now to move things is if things are broken up enough into small enough pieces that you can say, okay, well, these things that are in Angular, we can just kind of have them sit here in maintenance mode,
Right.
and then the things that are still in desktop absolutely need to be ported off of desktop, a desktop app, and those can go straight to Blazor. It's again, I'm gonna, it's another one of those Angular for architects sort of questions: is how do you split your application up? Is it one application or is it multiple small applications?
So,
like
I mean,
what I'm working on right now.
David, you've revealed our secret. You've spilled the beans, David.
Oh no!
The secret of this entire thing
Was the secret to split it up, or was the secret to think
the secret
ahead?
is we can't possibly help people enough in only this hour or two show. They need to come to Angular for Architects.
Well, yeah, I mean,
that is the secret. No, I tried to capture that as note B on the notes here, 4B, which is that if you can either have or can divide, so that instead of having one giant Angular app comprising your system, let's say you have many Angular apps and they're really mostly independent, which I think is the scenario Paul was talking about. And so then kind of the obvious low-hanging fruit forward is to just move forward app by app if you have many small apps that are mostly independent from each other, right?
Yes and no. An extra layer of complexity for you is that most of these applications are also built with a core set of common controls and components and services and a shared library.
Sure.
And so at the org level, there's another layer of complexity that first you must port your common org-wide controls and services to the next framework, language, etc.
So let's say, though, that you don't even have that good of a situation, that you really do have one or more really big apps to where porting app by app, even porting just one of your apps at a time, is going to be so long compared to how long you have to do releases that it's unfeasible for the reasons we already discussed. Now you've got, so basically we keep plucking the low-hanging fruit, right? Hoping we run out of time before we have to address the hardest part. And that is you have a big app or several big apps, family of big apps. They're big enough relative to the rate of change that you have to do something incrementally. You've already decided that your something incrementally is going over to Angular. What are your paths? I have, I guess, a couple of these things are for notes at the extra notes at the end, not really letters, but the things I've written down are to move route by route, or to move component by component, service by service. Mm-hmm. What else is there? What all is there to consider?
Well, I wasn't bringing up that last point, off the cuff. It is part of this question. How is your app structured? That if you're not using routes, then you can't move route by route. If you have a poor AngularJS component structure in place, then moving component by component is going to be hard. If you're a large enterprise organization where roughly 50% of your app complexity is in common shared core libraries that are distributed across Artifactory, that is a different whole nother discussion to this of how to actually perform that migration.
Yeah, so I was thinking of that when I said your system is composed of many mostly independent apps. And I would say if a significant amount of your code is in shared libraries, regardless of your sharing mechanism, then you clearly do not have mostly independent. You actually have mostly dependent apps.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which means you're really looking more like if I have 20 apps, but they all use a substantial body of shared code, that really is basically the same problem as if I had one really big app. I have to find a way to port it, port it while the boat's still floating or whatever.
But that's a super important thing to understand, is that statement that you just made.
Yeah. You don't get a free pass by rejiggering your directories. If the files depend on each other,
well,
you have a tangle.
That your migration strategy of moving your app, when you have those highly dependent apps of the core library, the story becomes, oh, I'm actually migrating this mega app, if you will, that is my interconnected, disparate apps. You apply the answer that we're avoiding at that higher scale.
I think a couple of us have an exit that they have to get off to other vital things in only 10 minutes. So we should get to the actual hard part. How do you migrate a substantial Angular app that you can't avoid via any of the ways we talked about for 40 minutes? The two approaches I have seen in use most prominently are going route by route or going component by component. And you do this last one using the tooling which supports this. What it's called? It's like an upgrade, isn't it? Isn't that the name?
Yes, the Angular. I just had it.
I can't remember the syntax. It's been a couple of years. But basically,
module.
Yeah.
An Angular upgrade. Yeah.
And it's pretty slick. You can do things like take an AngularJS component and make it an Angular component and then use it, or vice versa. You can take a service you defined in Angular. Yeah. So Lance just put up a link. I'm gonna share this for everyone to see. There's this fellow Sam Julian. He's out there. He's made this really great. It's like an online video course you can buy for, I think it's like a few $100s. It's not very much, right? And he goes into enormous depth of the details of how to use the upgrade module to achieve these things. So, and we're not going to attempt to cover here. We're not going to bring up a screen share in the next 10 minutes and go over the details of how to do it. But Sam's stuff is really great for the details. Although I don't know that watching his video course would necessarily help you with the gigantic, difficult architectural difficulty if you have to do this at big scale.
And I will make a point out. Although it looks like Julian, it's actually Julene.
Julene, yeah. I think I've actually met him.
Yeah.
And
very
said
nice
the
guy.
name wrong. Sorry. Okay, so you can go component by component. You can go service by service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now, there was an earlier approach that was pretty heavily hyped, and that was going route by route.
Yeah, that was the one that I talked about, and that was purely because we were able to do it because we were not using AngularJS routing. I am not sure if the AngularJS router would work well with Angular router. No. I haven't actually had to try that.
The early idea was that you could use one of the routers to route to the other.
Yes.
But that was kind of superseded. I don't think that ever materialized to the full extent they originally had in mind. There are people doing this approach where you literally just run both routers.
That's what we were doing.
You can go copy paste. I think it's actually on a Stack Overflow page. I've seen the exact code you need. But basically, you make the fallback from one go to the other. So if the new router doesn't have a matching route, you invoke the old router.
Right. Yeah, that's effectively what we were doing in that. And I mean, part for C and for D, for route by route and component by component, one of the things that made our project easier to move is one, as I said, we were on TypeScript, but we also really adhered to the AngularJS style guide. If we didn't adhere to the AngularJS style guide, like if we had more than one component in a file, that which isn't even a thought in Angular because we're using the CLI and that's the way it's going to write it, it becomes hugely more difficult if it's not to a standard, to a consistent standard. So because AngularJS could be written in a bunch of different ways, which is one of the reasons why the stock guide came about in the first place.
So I think this is the unstated iceberg of migrating AngularJS to Angular, which is that no matter what technique you use, it's probably going to rely on your AngularJS code being reasonably consistent and modern AngularJS code. So if you have very old, highly idiosyncratic AngularJS code, you may actually have to do a fair amount of refactoring modernization, which you can do incrementally, without stopping the world, in order to kind of fit into the upgrade path well.
Or you have to figure out how do we rewrite it en masse, and just skip the route by route or component by component upgrade. You do a big bang, as they used to call it, switch to either Angular or another framework at that point.
So one more technique that has had some, I've not done one of these in one of our projects, but I've talked to other consultants who have done this with great results in other projects. And that is, sometimes you can take some critical new functionality, bundle it up with Angular elements, and use that to drop it in the middle of your AngularJS project. Now that has all the usual considerations about web components that we can definitely not fit in the small number of minutes we have with our whole group here. But that's, I guess, one more different fork in the road of a path you can go.
I guess then an F, which is kind of like an E2, is a micro front end, which is its own sort of beast architecturally, and basically say, hey, this section of the page is running something different.
So I put that at the bottom. The word micro front actually already appears on the notes at the very bottom, last line. But that seemed like that's sort of like, that's almost like a now you have two problems situation.
It is definitely one you need to really consider. Like if you have decided, hey, we're going to move to another framework completely, not Angular, so we're not going to do any of the A, B, C, D, or E's. But if we're moving to Svelte, how do you move to Svelte at that point from AngularJS? And, some of the steps for A through E might apply to that moving to another framework, and so having a page that a user sees that is running more than one framework at a time in different areas of the page, which is a very loose definition of micro front end, that may be the route you need to take. But, this is all things that you would need to, I think what I'm coming down to is at the end, it's all going to depend on your project. The solution that we are putting up here is all going to depend upon your current project and where that project needs to go in the future. It's not a very satisfying answer.
Yeah, but at least we have a rubric.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, between all of us, we came up with many, many different steps and paths and choices to make of different, that would lead you to a different approach. So I would say for any project scenario that comes up, the answer is probably somewhere on here. Although, there could be some scenario that's like yet another even different than anything we've talked about. But it seems like we've covered a very wide range of possibilities.
I do want to point out, in case it's not clear, like there's also an implicit thing not present where with all of like C, D, and E, the end goal is not to like land in a spot where you're living in two worlds at once. Like the last step of all of these is the eventual migration of existing code to the new world. Like this idea of living route by route, component by component, service by service. The primary reason that you do that is that way new features can arrive in the new language and then start living side by side with your existing application. And that gives you a platform that allows you to A, deliver that new functionality, and B, while continuing to deliver new functionality, picking up one of your features that you already have piece by piece and then actually converting it. So you still have all the work of A. You just are afforded the opportunity to do so in a way where you don't have to stop the world. And the end result is that you will have eventually converted everything over, depending on the granularity that you like. And at that point, you get to remove the old router mechanism, the old framework code, and all the cruft that came with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
on that note, I do have to leave. So it's nice talking with you folks.
Well, take it easy, Paul. And I guess as Lance, are you bailing out also? I thought Lance might be waving. We'll see you, Paul.
See you later.
Yeah, I should probably get going as well.
Okay.
I'll see you, Lance. And David and I will talk about a few more things, I guess, if you got a few minutes. See you guys.
See you guys.
See everyone in a couple weeks.
Yeah, to continue what Paul was saying, it's the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
So, new features in the new framework, and only maintenance stuff in the old framework. And if you have to put a new feature into that old framework, well, it's time to update that section of the code to your new framework, whatever that happens to be, and pull that in.
A thing that I wouldn't say, not quite heartburn. A thing that I've had some near heartburn about when talking with people about this kind of thing is there is a very substantial, I was about to say a cost. I say there are a list of very substantial costs to running in that hybrid mode. And so you probably don't want to stay there any longer. And so I'm going to talk about the ones I can think of. Then you're going to tell me like three more I didn't think of. One is like, there's all this talk. There's people bragging on Twitter. There are benchmarks. There are comparisons trying to minimize startup time and bytes on the page. If you're running in a hybrid mode, you're carrying both frameworks onto your pages the whole time until you're done. And like, however great you thought your tree shaking and so on was, it's like you're going to pay 2x, that maybe you're going to pay like the full cost of whatever. Like you can optimize both, but you're still going to stack them both up, and that's going to be more than either one of them. It's going to be as much as both of them together. There's no shared code between AngularJS and Angular, so you're not going to get any commonality of code extracted out between them. You're going to pay for both on your page. The next thing that comes to mind is the complexity cost, right? Like when you're working on a very idiomatically laid out set of components and projects and libraries. Let's say you're a big enterprise, you're probably using NX. It's organizing stuff nicely for you. You just have this beautifully clear path forward for an all Angular project. And like, you don't have that if you're partway through a migration.
Right.
You're going to be carrying a ton of complexity. You might have a custom Webpack configuration plugin into each of your projects where you're tweaking a bunch of paths to try to get the right AngularJS code to come in. So you're going to pay this complexity. That complexity is going to eat up your budget of money and time.
And on the programmer side, you now have to have coders who have to know AngularJS and Angular or whatever you're moving to at the same time. And maybe you split it up so that you don't have that, so that only people who are working on new features need to know the new framework, and only people working on maintenance do the old one. But then you have an issue of
there's a boundary.
Your developers are you have a certain amount of developers who are stagnating, or who have low morale because I'm on maintenance now.
How are you going to retain the developers who you told they can't use the new framework? They have to keep using the old. That's going to be an HR problem. Let's say you run low, you need more. You call your recruiters, tell your recruiters, hey, go find me folks who are really good at both AngularJS, because we have this huge AngularJS code base and we need to fix some urgent bugs in it, but we're doing a lot of new work in Angular. And so we really need people that are very adept at both. Like, your recruiter is not going to be happy with that.
You're probably not going to be happy, because I imagine, especially as time goes on, if there are companies out there that are staying on AngularJS, it won't be probably as bad as it was with COBOL. But my mother-in-law was paid really good money when she was hired as a contractor to work on COBOL stuff, because COBOL was pretty much dead. And so there weren't many people.
We got a long way to go before this stuff is like COBOL.
No, but I imagine there's still people out there that can command a pretty good rate for saying, "Hey, I'm coming into this legacy framework that is dying."
I mean, I would say that's
how
a
do I do
cost
that?
of not migrating, right? It's like
Yeah.
if companies that are in this situation that in 2021 finally bite the bullet and they say, yeah, we're going to do an incremental route by route approach, and we're going to throw as much effort as we need to get this thing done. And at the end of 2021, we're going to take the old framework and delete it out of our project.
Mhm.
Those companies are going to kind of bite the bullet now. But companies who just keep deferring are eventually going to be in the situation you just described, right? Where eventually they're just going to have to go pay whatever it costs to go find people who still understand the old thing, which are going to be in fewer numbers over time. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can find developers. I know they're out there. I've met them who are perfectly content to just stay on this one technology and just continue to work on it. And as we talked
overall,
about, there's
the community still moves forward.
Yeah, and the AngularJS, they're that paid long-term support. It's also an MIT license. So do you need to upgrade? If it's a huge application, it's not going to be like Flash where the Flash player goes away. It's all JavaScript eventually. So AngularJS, as long as JavaScript is there, AngularJS can run in 15 years.
So the only thing that's not that I'm trying to think, it's called CSP. There's a security layer that can be turned on, which intentionally makes JavaScript less dynamic to prevent certain kinds of security attacks.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember, I think maybe AngularJS is just, its design does not enable it to do that because it kind of compiles at runtime. There actually is a possibility that practices in the web will go a direction that eventually make AngularJS not work anymore.
Yeah,
I have to think that we'd be talking years out for that to get wide adoption.
Yeah,
but it's possible. It could happen.
I mean, Chrome is famous or infamous for implementing certain sandboxes or security or deprecating certain things in JavaScript. And so's the ECMAScript group. They deprecate stuff that doesn't matter to JavaScript or is a security concern to JavaScript.
So JavaScript, they've been. I mean, I'm actually incredibly impressed with how they've avoided breaking almost any old JavaScript that's out in the wild. So they're pretty good. But like, if something was security driven, though, sometimes the concern to try to keep making the web more robust, more safe, will eventually overcome the hesitancy to break old stuff.
Yeah, a concrete example is like use strict in JavaScript. You don't really have to do that anymore because a lot of browsers turn that on automatically.
Interesting.
So
I guess I've used the ES modules for so long I haven't even
forgot about use strict
in many years.
Yeah. So like it's kind of on by default, either through a browser or even through just the framework, or TypeScript or whatever. It's automatically strict. So I think the rule is that module code is always strict. I think that's the rule. Module code is always in strict mode. That makes sense.
So if you import or export, you are a module, and therefore your code will be strict.
Right. So I guess that's a way that they can get around the backward compatibility, is because if you're writing old JavaScript, you're not writing it in modules.
Yeah. And when I think back during the maybe first half to maybe even 2/3 of the work that we did in AngularJS here in our org was non-module JavaScript. And only toward maybe the last third of our work that we were doing in AngularJS had we moved to using all module code for our AngularJS. And in fact,
but it wasn't JavaScript modules; it was Angular modules.
No, JavaScript modules.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, in fact, an interesting side note on that. So we stopped offering public open enrollment AngularJS training quite some time ago because the number of people signing up for it just fell apart, went to almost zero.
Right.
So we train a lot of people on Angular today, but just
I was one of those last instructors for AngularJS for us. So
looks like I have I'm monitoring our stream over in another one here, and it seems like I have an incredibly fast upstream connection, so I don't know why I'm getting some freezes on my video feed. Anyway, so before we stopped doing it publicly, only like when a private group asks for it, we had upgraded the code that we use to teach AngularJS to use ES modules and a bundler, and like kind of make it really modernized. We've actually had to go sometimes for certain customers, go back and reach back to an older version of the curriculum to get the files the old way before we used
the ES
modules, right? Because we're helping teams where the whole point is they're still using all their old build tooling setup and so on from 7 years ago.
Right.
And like, I mean, they would like to go to all the new stuff, but if once all the new stuff, they'd be using Angular, not AngularJS.
I mean,
the reason they're summoning help to train a new crop of people is to go back and support the old code as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if using ES modules was part of the AngularJS documentation. I know that's what we added to our curriculum. We also started talking about using TypeScript in AngularJS, but like when I was using at the other project, when we upgraded a TypeScript, that was not part of AngularJS. That was not anything that was really documented on AngularJS, the documentation site. We figured out how to do it, and we figured out we made a couple of missteps on how to do it. And had to rewrite some code. There was I don't even remember we weren't using direct imports. We were using something else, which has since been deprecated, and we had to rewrite that. So, but it was all custom. We all had to we as a team kind of architected, hey, this is the way we want to work,
right?
And it did help us, and it helped us then and migrating things in the future.
So, I was on projects at the same time you were describing where my projects were doing that same thing.
Yep.
Coming up with how to use TypeScript, how to set up a bundler so that we could start benefiting from some of the newer generation of tooling.
Yep.
While not stopping to rewrite the world.
Right. Right.
But that was so long ago that I see why
it was
so many projects in that
5-6 years ago for me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And like many projects sort of went stagnant for a while because they were working fine and are now, just now in the last year and now, the impetus has arrived to upgrade everything.
Yep. Well, I used to be a Flex developer, and I know, Flash Player finally died. I actually do too. The more TypeScript gets a hold and evolves, and the more Angular evolves, the more like Flex it feels in a lot of ways. But when Flash Player died and was removed from many browsers, and they kept pushing that deadline back. It was, I think, originally 2018, but it finally died this year or end of 2020. And there are still many companies and many other people were still using Flash for mission critical applications. There was I read an article about a train system in China that they couldn't schedule any of their trains or anything else like that because Flash had suddenly died, and they had to over the course of 20 hours, 2 days or so, figured out how to install an old version of Flash, which has the huge risk of, well, now you've just opened up all those security holes.
Yeah.
But it's like, so you don't want to be in that situation.
Well, I mean, we've been counseling people for the last several years that it is time to upgrade your old apps.
That sounds like a segue to if you have any more questions or problems, then you should contact us.
Yeah, I should tell you what, I'll
solve those things.
I will drop our company URL in the chat here, just in case anyone what goes back and watches this and wants to bring on some people who work with us to help do these things. But well, we should wrap up since some of our group already left. Thanks for joining us today as a guest host.
Sure
David.
thing. Sure thing. Anytime.
This was a lot of fun, and for our viewers, look, we still have several going live. I hope that it's been useful to you also, or if you're back and watching this on replay, I hope you've got a lot out of it, regardless of whether you contacted us. So I guess bye, David, and bye, everybody.
Thanks. See you all next time.